Hey everyone, Chris Erkele here for HS's Game Time. Alongside me is Eric Paul Johnson, and we are having a special edition of sorts, a State Bowl kind of round table discussion, because as many of you probably know already, Vista Marietta, despite beating Centennial on Friday evening in the CIF title game, was left out of the State Bowl game. Division I, Santa Margarita, a team that won the Pac-5 championship, but did have two losses on the season, including a loss to Mater Dei, who did not make the playoffs, took the bid instead. And, of course, no secret that because of the forfeit, the five non-league games that Vista Marietta had to forfeit, that definitely most likely played a factor, although, as EPJ will discuss, Coley Kendall, the head coach of Vista Marietta, was kind of not under the assumption that would play as much of a factor as it did because of what was told to him by the CIF. And we will also touch on Rancho Verde, not as quite as controversial of a snub, but they were Helix from San Diego was taken over Rancho Verde instead, despite Rancho Verde's undefeated record. And really, Palm Springs and Rancho Verde, many were probably pretty impressed by the way that Rancho Verde basically dominated that game. It wasn't really in contention at any time, and maybe some thought that because of that would be enough for Rancho Verde to impress and get that bowl bid in Division II, but wasn't the case. But first, we're going to go back over here to EPJ and talk about Vista Marietta. At the time of the forfeits, Coley Kendall seemed to think that that wasn't really, the whole forfeit thing wasn't going to be as big a part of the State Bowl berth as it turned out to be. But just talk about you speaking with him yesterday. He was kind of caught off guard by the whole thing.
Yeah, when the forfeits came to light and actually got put into effect back in October, Tom Simmons, who is the director of communications, the spokesperson for the CIF Southern Section, made a statement basically saying that the on-the-field play and results would be what mattered most. Coach Kendall took that as a, kind of that's what's going to matter in the end. Our 14-0 on-the-field records is what's going to happen. Now, the problem with that is, and it's on both ends, I don't think Tom Simmons probably should have made the statement he did, and Coley Kendall probably shouldn't have believed what was being said on that. And because the CIF Southern Section office only has one of the votes when it comes to State Bowl. So even if they had supported Vista in the end saying, we're going to take our 14-0 on the field team and go on there, you still have to convince 9 other commissioners who are on that selection committee to overlook the forfeits. And, I think a lot of people would say that was not going to happen. So I think a little maybe naivete there that it wasn't going to play a factor in the end. But, they're kind of saying our section told us this wasn't going to be a factor. So they took that to heart, thinking they had a good strong chance. Maybe
just break down for people that might not be familiar with the process just how the whole voting thing works.
Okay, I mean, you basically take any team that has won a section championship is eligible for a bowl game. And then it comes down to the 4 criteria, which are win-loss record, head-to-head matchups, common opponents, and strength of schedule, and you throw those all in, and you have 10 people voting on this. It's the section commissioners from each of the 10 sections that are voting on this, and then whoever gets the most votes at the end has the majority of votes. Then that's what it comes down to. So that's how that voting process comes down to. So, and that's a dilemma in itself, because as Rancho Verde coach Pete Duffy said, is you have 10 people who probably have not seen these teams play on the field. They're going with what they see on paper. And that's what the decision they're making there. So it's not an easy decision for anyone to make.
I mean, there was just such respect for Upland and both Centennial, and to see the way that Vista Marietta was able to defeat both of those teams, many would probably think that was enough for them to deserve that spot.
Right, and I mean, this is not to take anything away from Santa Margarita. When it came down to it, the selection committee said strength of schedule was the factor. According to Cal Prep, Santa Margarita played the second toughest schedule in the state this year, which is, and it's probably true. They play in the toughest league probably in the nation, the Trinity League. They had to beat Long Beach Poly, Mission Viejo, and San Clemente in the final 3 rounds, and just as impressive as Vista Marietta going through North, Upland, and Centennial. Now you can say that Vista a little bit tougher. That when it came down to semifinal weekend, 3 of the Inland Division teams were top 6 in the state. So you get down to that factor that both teams played an extremely tough schedule. I cannot buy the selection committee representatives coming out and saying strength of schedule was the determining factor in here, because I do believe if Vista Murrieta is 14-0, they are playing for a bowl game this year. And you had a little bit of double talk coming from the 2 spokespeople from the committee yesterday. On one hand, Ken Gunn, the event coordinator, said the forfeits were briefly discussed, but it was strength of schedule that it boiled down to. Yet when I asked Maria Shida, who's the executive director of the CIF state office, was Vista Murrieta looked at as a 14-0 team on the field or a 9-5 team? And she said they were a 9-5 team. So from that, you have to say the forfeits did play a factor in this. So, I guess what I'd have to say is that the most disappointing thing is, like, the CIF could have said, the CIF state office could have set a precedent here just by saying if a team's forfeited games, they count as losses. You have 5 losses, you're not going to a game. They found a way not to set a precedent in this decision by basically coming up with an argument of strength of schedule. And while Santa Margarita played a great, tough schedule, I don't think their schedule was strong enough to overcome 2 losses.
2 losses, yeah. And one of their losses, which kind of could play a factor if you want to stretch it out, was to Mater Dei,
right.
A team that lost to Centennial, right. And then Centennial was defeated by Vista. Does that connect together?
In the actual criteria, it doesn't, because that would be 1 degree of separation away from their criteria. You could do common opponents. Had Vista Murrieta beat Mater Dei head-to-head, then that strength could have factored into it a little bit more. I've been back and forth on whether or not I believe Vista Murrieta should be in a state bowl game or not. If a lot of people don't know what happened on the forfeits was, they were given kind of misinformation on the transfer that happened 3 years ago. They tried to check in every way they could into this. They believed they had all the correct information. It finally came to light this year that the player in question was ineligible when he played in those first 5 games. So the question is, they did violate a CIF Southern Section rule by playing an ineligible player. Whether or not you say it was their fault or not, that's one way. By forfeiting 5 non-league games, there really isn't a punishment. It didn't hurt them in a league championship. It didn't hurt them in a section championship. So the punishment for playing an eligible player was not getting to a state bowl game. Now, the other argument is Vista Murrieta did the honorable and right thing by reporting this. This is probably something that they could have kept under wraps and been 14-0 and gone through it, taken the risk that no one would find out about it and report it, and gone to a state bowl game. So a lot of people are saying, well, they could have basically said, here's a reward for doing the honorable thing, the whole pursuing victory with honor that the CIF heavily pushes, and say, you did the right thing, you got everything done on the field, you should be in a state bowl game. So that's the back and forth. Do I believe Vista Murrieta was the best team to represent? Yes. Do I think, even though that it wasn't their fault, there had to be some sort of punishment for breaking a CIF rule? Yes. That's a tough thing to say. I believe that rule needs to be maybe re-examined and rewritten on a case-by-case basis, that you don't automatically have to forfeit a game.
Knowing what you know about the situation, though, in your opinion, does what happens here, does it seem excessive as far as a penalty that they would deserve?
No. I think, and, talking to Coley Candell and Vista Murrieta AD Ray Moore, had the state selection committee come out and said, we weren't going to take a team with 5 forfeit losses. Up front, just 2 months ago or whenever. Or I admit that when the Southern Section office said it shouldn't be it won't be a factor, that was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was the CIF state office just not saying, this team had 5 forfeits, those are 5 losses, we're not taking a 5-loss team. And even Coley Candell would have said, that would have been fine with us, but for them to come up with a different argument, using a strength of schedule argument,
which what they're basically,
Coley Candell says it's an excuse. because they didn't want to. I think they figured that by addressing the forfeits, it's a negative issue. They wanted to more say strength of schedule is a positive thing why Santa Margarita got in, not forfeits are the reason Vista Murrieta didn't get in. So that's the big dilemma here. And
how knowledgeable do you think these other commissioners were about the details of the forfeit situation?
I'm sure that cases got presented pretty heavily, but when it comes down to it, the Southern Section had to back one of those two teams, and basically present the case. And with Santa Margarita winning this, there's no doubt that the Southern Section ended up backing Santa Margarita on this case. So I don't think Vista Murrieta really was a strong player in this, because I think they basically looked at them as a 9-5 team. Mm-hmm. So I think it came down to Santa Margarita and Bakersfield. Bakersfield was undefeated at 13-0, and you could definitely argue strength of schedule at that point that Santa Margarita deserved to be in. Coley Candell said if they would have chosen Bakersfield, he wouldn't really have had much of an issue because Bakersfield did everything they needed to do on the field. So it's from the start of everything, a lot of things. It goes back 3 years ago when the school from Georgia messed up on the paperwork, to all the way to the CIF maybe making a different excuse for not choosing Vista Murrieta. There's a lot of people who messed up in this decision.
Looking ahead now, a guy like Asua Cravens or Nick Stevens, who are juniors and are going to be back next year, do you think they play now with an extra chip on their shoulder, feeling like their perfect season? Because really, those kids played their heart out all year long and had nothing to do with this whole situation. Yeah. They must feel like they were kind of robbed.
Yeah, and that's where Coley Candell basically said is, 80 to 90 kids who had nothing to do with any of the situation have been punished. And especially when you look at that, the group of seniors who
won't have another shot,
who have 3 championship game appearances on their resume and everything, aren't going to get that shot. I believe Vista Murrieta, once those forfeits came out, played with the chip on their shoulder. I think it was one of the differences in them winning this year. Are those players next year going to want to come back and maybe prove something? Yeah, I think they've hit what was the ultimate goal set by Coley Candell 9 years ago when he started this program. There is now something more to achieve. Next year there will be twice as many teams that will be playing in state bowl games, because you'll have a semifinal round. So that will give more teams an opportunity to get in there. But there is still, I think a lot of people have also mentioned there's just still a perception that the Pac-5 division is, supreme. And year-to-year basis, that might be true.
But this year,
the Inland was at least on par, if not better, than the Pac-5 division. But
Rev beat Mission Viejo.
Yeah, Rev beat Mission Viejo. Vista Murrieta beat Crespi on the field. Centennial beat Mater Dei. Upland beat Loyola. You can go through all of that and kind of say that was on there. So I think, the CIF tries to say that no division is kind of perceived higher than the other. That division, that the Pac-5 division, the Northern Division, and the Inland Division are kind of like 1A, 1B, 1C out there. But, I think the clear indication of the backing of Santa Margarita in this case shows that the Pac-5 is still going to take precedence in anyone. And that's a shame for teams like Centennial and Vista Murrieta, because they can't control what playoff division that they're in. A lot of people say Centennial should go play in the Pac-5 division. Well, they can't. They can't, you can't do that unless you create some type of open division where you just start, put 16 of the best teams all in there. And, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So, that's the stigma, and Pete Duffy, another thing he said is, the Inland Empire still needs to, is still gaining respect. And he basically said, unless you're named Centennial, you still have to prove yourself.
Let's introduce that other topic here is Rancho Verde. They were perfect undefeated season, and they handily beat Palm Springs in the championship game. That was the 1-2 matchup out there in the Central Division. Obviously, a Helix, a team that did have one loss on the year, ended up taking that Division II bid. Rancho Verde was impressive in all games that they played. Obviously, the division that they were in their league wasn't considered a top league. There was a few quality teams like a La Sierra in there, and they had a strong non-league win against Heritage, a team that lost in the Eastern Division to Summit. No doubt that Heritage was a quality team. They played down to the wire in their CIF championship game. Despite kind of a weaker schedule for Rancho Verde, which obviously the non-league was in their play, but the league play is out. Do you feel in the fashion that they basically dominated all season long should have given them more consideration?
I think that they were considered, pretty strongly. I mean, I think the undefeated record helps that. Do I have a problem with the selection committee taking Helix? No. I mean, I think this is. Strength of schedule is obviously something that this committee is playing heavily on. And if you look, Rancho Verde can't control their league. There's nothing about that. So they have 7 games that are kind of just set before them who they play. They can control who they play out of league. And
besides Heritage, which they obviously won that game. What were their other better matchups?
I think they played West Valley and San Gorgonio. So were their other 2 non-league games. And I believe that if you look at them, Rancho Verde needs to at least schedule 1 game from outside the area. They need to start playing, a few of the stronger Orange County LA teams because, they do have a stigma that they might be avoiding some competition. And talking to Coach Duffy, I said, will this change anything? Since they said strength of schedule, will you go out and schedule some big opponents? And he goes, that they'll take any offers, they'll look at anyone that they can play, but what it comes down to is he almost says that if you lose that game, then you're going to be out of state bowl consideration. But on the flip side, if you were to win that game,
it would help you a lot.
It definitely helps you a lot. And if you look at a case at Santa Margarita, lost 2 games, still got in a state bowl game. So I think if you go out and say, I'm willing to play the toughest competition, you can win a few of those games. Even a loss here and there might not hurt you in the end. So, but Helix, the argument against Helix was they lost to a team that was 8-4.
Who was that?
And that was Chula Vista Eastlake, a team that ended up losing in the quarterfinals of the Division I playoffs down in San Diego. And Eastlake's a team that lost to another 8-4 team. So you can get into that argument of it was a very bad loss. It was on par with maybe the Santa Margarita losing to Modern Day. But Helix did close strong. They won 12 straight games and just rolled through their division. And I think what really impressed the selection committee in this case was Helix beat Oceanside 44-6, and Oceanside's a 2-time bowl game participant. While this isn't the strongest Oceanside team of years past, I think
they beat them handily.
Yeah, I think it's a perception of Oceanside, but on that same case, you could say, well, then why didn't Vista Murrieta get more consideration? Centennial's been to 3 bowl games and they beat them. So, it's a tough program when you're only choosing 10 teams from over, I believe 1,500 teams in this state. It becomes tough when you're boiling that down. Who should go in? Who shouldn't? It's not an easy decision. As Ray Moore said, I don't think anyone would envy that. You can make an argument for almost any team out here, who won a section title that they should have that opportunity. So
if this was next year, then we probably wouldn't be having this debate then.
No, it would just maybe be where is Vista? It seems like they eliminated. I don't think Vista Murrieta would have been playing for, they could have been ruled out because you would probably have Westlake playing Santa Margarita for the Open Division semifinal, and then maybe Bakersfield versus Vista Murrieta for the Division I game. But still, with 5 losses, they could have found a way to put the LA City Section champion in over Vista Murrieta. And it's still, even with twice as many teams next year, that means you're going to be picking, 20 teams to play in games, but you're still going to have those 3 or 4 teams saying, well, why didn't we get in? And this kind of, so while it's nice that they have the state bowl games, it's going to be imperfect. Kind of like a lot of people are now comparing it to the BCS system. Someone's going to get left out. Someone's going to be upset in the end.
Well, always controversial. And this year, after these picks, all there is left to do is kind of talk about the what ifs. And next year, we'll see what happens. I'm sure there will still be other teams that will be left to kind of fume a little bit about what had happened. But this year, obviously, Vista Murrieta is going to want to hang their heads. They can't really hang their heads because they played an excellent season. They never lost on the field. Unfortunately, they had an unfortunate situation where they had to forfeit those 5 games. But they were the winners on the scoreboard every time they took the field this year. And same thing with Rancho Verde. They won every single game. Maybe next year, if they could possibly change a few things with their non-league schedule, but they did impress and clearly win in a convincing fashion every single game that they had on the season against several quality opponents. So that does it for this special edition of kind of the Bowl Talk Roundtable. Unfortunately, no IE teams will be taking the field this weekend in the state bowl games, but next year we'll just have to see what happens. All right, for EPJ, I'm Chris Erkley, and for now, we will see you next time.
Rancho Ford offers 0% financing on everything in stock.